Welcome back to Face with me, Pilar. Tonight, I have the pleasure of talking about pleasure. That's the topic for this episode of Face to Face. And it's one of my favorites because it's another one of those topics that Cindy Joseph and I talked so much about during the course of our friendship. And it was one of the first moments that I really recognized that Cindy and I were going to be not just friends, but confidants, and that Cindy would become a real mentor for me. This particular day in my life was, I was in Minneapolis and Cindy was in New York, and she just called to check in on me. And she could hear from the tone of my voice that I was not in a great place. I was really stressed out by work, and I'd been doing a lot of overwork where I was, 60, 70, 80 hours a week working on the magazine that I'd started a few years prior. And by this time, Cindy had known me for a while, and she'd observed that I was basically a workaholic and a perfectionist, and that a lot of my life revolved around getting things done. And she had told me on more than one occasion about the philosophy that she had followed, which was living according to what pleasured her. And every time she would say that, there was a part in me that was like, oh, what? It sounded kind of naughty. And it also sounded really interesting. I couldn't really imagine living in a way that was centered around my pleasure. And I didn't have any models for what that looked like. So hanging out with Cindy was really an education in following instincts and desires and pleasures of the moment. And it went against everything that I had been told that I should do to be a good person and a good woman and a successful character. So what I want to talk to you about today, this evening, I decided to come and do this in the evening where I felt like I would have more of my free time personality and be more inclined to tell you the truth about what I learned from Cindy. I didn't want it to feel like work, so I scheduled it after my work hours. You can tell that for me, working is kind of my default mode. So playing and focusing on pleasure takes a certain amount of intentionality for me. And that was something I had to learn. Cindy helped me learn that. So I want to tell you the story of the day that Cindy and I had one of our most important conversations, our first conversations about pleasure, and when she really just blew my mind. So I'd been working for hours and hours and hours and days and days and days on end, and I get on the phone with Cindy, who I was always so happy to talk with. And she's like, "How are you, hon?" And I'm like, "I'm okay." And I sounded kind of brittle and edgy. And she said, "Really? What's really going on?" And so then I went on, about how much I'd been working and about how little I'd been playing. And she asked me what it was that I felt like I wanted or needed in that moment. And I just drew a blank. I remember thinking, I have no idea. I don't know. I don't know what I want. All I know is what I have to do. And she said, "You need to slow down. You need to slow down in order to hear what you want. You need to just take a break." And I was like, "I can't take a break. I have to do all this stuff." And she said, "I'm telling you, you need to stop. Whatever you do next, you're going to make a mistake. You're going to cause a problem for yourself. You're going to have an accident. You need to just ask yourself the question, what would feel good right now? It doesn't have to be some big pie in the sky thing. Just what would feel good to you right now?" And it's I almost started crying. I was like, honestly, all I can think of is that I really want to go to this little coffee shop down the street and just not bring any work with me and just sit with a cup of coffee and people watch and listen to people's conversations, maybe look at the paper, just doodle in a notebook or journal or something. And she goes, "Do it." I was like, "I can't. I have all these deadlines. I've got a meeting at 9. I've got to be out. Blah, blah, blah." She goes, "Just do it. The world is not going to fall apart. Call in sick, tell people something came up." She goes, "You need to focus on something that will actually make you happy and bring you pleasure right now? And because Cindy was telling me to do it, I suddenly took it seriously. And some part of me recognized that she was right and that I had lost all track of what I was doing in terms of my own desires and pleasures and satisfaction. And I'd just been on a forced march to produce and be productive and accomplish things. So that was the beginning for me of an amazing day. I'll tell you the short version of what happened was I went to that coffee shop and I immediately met this really handsome guy who took a shine to me and asked me out. And we ended up dating for, I don't know, a few months. Didn't turn out to be the right guy for me, but he was a great guy. We're still friends to this day. And it was amazing. And I was like, she's psychic. And I really credited Cindy Joseph with having sent me on this kind of crazy goose chase toward my own happiness. So that also began, though, a really interesting period of professional research for me, because I was like, she's right about something. I felt so different by the end of that day. I was like, I need to do more of this. And I also, the intellectual part of me wanted to know why it seemed to have had the magical effect that it had had on my mood, my energy, my sense of hope, even my focus. I had so much more creativity. I was able to get things done. The next day, I did much more than I had done the day before when I was on a forced march. Having taken the break seemed to really help. So it's interesting. I ended up writing about this in a series of articles in Experience Life magazine. One of them was called A Real Pleasure. And in it, I shared a bunch of the research that I had churned up about what happens to our bodies and our minds on pleasure. And it's fascinating. It turns out that pleasure has a bunch of really positive effects on your physical body. It improves your immunity. It improves your obviously your energy, but your focus. And it has some interesting things like it increases the levels of certain chemicals in your body that improve your sociability. There's pro-social chemicals. There's one called proencaphalin A, which is a protective chemical for your immune system. Anyway, a whole bunch, a flood, a cascade of positive healing chemicals, anti-inflammatory chemicals, pro-immune chemicals flood your body when you have pleasure, including things like oxytocin, which are great for bonding and relaxation and digestion. So if you're interested in the science of pleasure, check out that article. It's called A Real Pleasure by me, Pilar Gersimo, and it appeared probably more than a decade ago in Experience Life magazine, not too long after Cindy and I had this conversation. I also wrote about pleasure in my book, The Healthy Deviant. This is my new book. It's called The Healthy Deviant, A Rule Breaker's Guide to Being Healthy in an Unhealthy World. And it includes some wisdom from Cindy. Cindy was such a source of mentorship and wise counsel in my life. And some of it was really about the lessons that, specifically around pleasure, where she taught me to re-evaluate my life on the basis of how much pleasure it was bringing me. So I ended up including something called a pleasure clock in this book. And I wish I had had a chance to share this with Cindy, because I know she would have just loved it. But it was this tool for tracking the moments in my day that actually did bring me pleasure. One of the things that I realized was that I had been so focused on my productivity that I'd kind of lost track of prioritizing my pleasure or making space for it in my life. And all I ever did was worry about getting more things done. So in my book, with the head nod to Cindy Joseph for having me pay attention, I created this thing called the pleasure clock. And here's one that hasn't been filled in yet, and here's one that's been filled in. The idea behind the pleasure clock, it's a tool I'm happy to share with all of my Boom friends. If you're interested, I'll make a little worksheet available for you as a downloadable tool. The idea with the pleasure clock is simply to notice the points in your day where you are having pleasure. where something good happens. You're smelling the roses or drinking the wine or enjoying the sunset or a cuddle with your dog or your partner or being amused by something that you saw or just anything that is beautiful or lovely or pleasant or relieving. When I started keeping track of the pleasure in my life and I started noticing how much good pleasure there really was, I actually started creating more of it for myself. And I started making it a goal to have more pleasure and fun in my life. And a lot of my life has changed as the result of that. So I just love to encourage you to think about that in your own life. Where are the sources of pleasure? And how much attention are you putting on having pleasure in your life? How does it feel when you make pleasure a priority in your life? And when you choose to live in ways that allow space for more pleasure in your life, what happens? For me, what happened, thanks to Cindy and her wise counsel, was that my life got better, a lot better. Not only did I have more fun and more pleasure, but because I was having more fun and more pleasure, I was able to offer more rather than less in the ways that really mattered inside of my career and my professional life. And I think a lot of the work that I've done, including my book and the magazine and the podcast that I do called The Living Experiment, have all been informed by all of this. So my offer to you is the same offer that Cindy made to me. What do you really think might feel good now? What could you do, even if it's a small thing, to fulfill a desire or an instinct or a calling? Maybe it's just going, to get yourself a better than average cup of coffee. And maybe it's more. Notice what you're wanting. Pay attention to what's bringing you pleasure and then do more of that. I think Cindy Joseph would approve.